Join us for Diffusion Digital at diffusion.events, our two-day virtual conference from the 15th to the 16th of September, showcasing leading projects from across Web3 with firesides and panels featuring leaders like Joe Lubin of Ethereum and others from projects including Set Protocol, The Graph, Dapper Labs, Parity, R3 Golem and eToro. So today I'm really happy to welcome the founder of Oasis Labs, Dawn Song. Welcome, Dawn.
Thanks a lot for having me.
You describe Oasis Labs, at least on the website, as the all-in-one tool for controlling and sharing data. With the Oasis network, you're looking to build a better internet. Actually, that's the tagline we use at Outlier for our accelerator. So I think we're probably well aligned. And you describe it as one that protects the data rights of individual users whilst enabling fundamentally new use cases and applications. And we're going to unpack a lot of what that means later. You also have something called the Open Foundation, and that is putting open data in the context of open money and open finance, and now, of course, open data. And this is something that I personally really subscribe to. And again, a fundamental part of the thesis that we've been developing at Outlier Ventures for several years. So some of the reasons why I wanted you on the show: firstly, you're an award-winning professor and academic. You've won the MacArthur Fellowship and the Guggenheim Fellowship for Natural Sciences, as well as a serial entrepreneur. And not many people manage to straddle both of those worlds. You've managed to do it very effectively. At Oasis Network, you're focused on an area, as I said, that's been really core to the thesis at Outlier Ventures, that of what we call a new open data economy, as well as this convergence of machine learning and blockchain. And so I believe you call what we call the open data economy the responsible data economy. And again, we're going to come to exactly why that terminology and why you believe we need a more responsible data economy. But I think if you look at your kind of academic background, specifically in security, this idea that it is possible to build an antidote to surveillance capitalism seems to be a theme that runs through a lot of the work that you're doing. But also, as I've been doing the Web3 Founder podcast, you specifically have come up in the journey of other founders, I believe, as a consequence of the work that you've been doing at Berkeley. So these are the several reasons why I'm really excited to have you on the show. So by way of a kind of segue into understanding your origin story, which I'll try my best to summarize, as I mentioned, your research interests in academia lie within deep learning and security, in particular privacy issues in computer systems and networks, distributed system security and applied cryptography, as well as this intersection of machine learning and security. So I believe you first began studying in academia I'm going to try to pronounce this right. You might have to correct me, but it's Tsinghua University. Did I get it right?
Tsinghua University in Beijing, China, yes.
Right. And was that physics? I couldn't actually understand exactly what it was, but I heard reference somewhere you started out in physics.
Right, yes. My undergraduate was in physics.
Okay, perfect. All right. I'm glad I got that bit right. Would have been an awkward start. You then did a master's in the science field of computer science at Carnegie Mellon University, graduating in 99. You then went to the University of California, Berkeley, and you did a Doctor of Philosophy in computer science, and then went back to Carnegie Mellon as a professor from 2002 to 7. I guess the kind of more relevant work specific to blockchain and some of the stuff that you're doing now at Oasis was as a professor at Berkeley, which is present from 2007 to now, so around 13 years. And there are several different research centres that you either lead or play a very active role in. I'll try my best to summarise some of them, but things like real-time intelligence, secure explainable systems, RISE Lab, all the way through to the Berkeley Institute for Data Science, Berkeley Artificial Intelligence Research Lab, and Foundations of Resilient Cyber-Physical Systems, Forces. So very varied, but of course, related. And I believe in parallel to a lot of the work that you've been doing at Berkeley, and as I said, where you've been formative to a number of people's careers in blockchain, you've also been a serial entrepreneur, but that was something I couldn't find so much information about. So it would be really interesting to understand your journey as I guess, an academic in the space, but also somebody that's been commercially exploring the commercialization of some of these research areas.
Great. Yeah, thanks a lot. And it's really impressive. It sounded like you did a lot of research before this podcast. Thanks a lot. Yes, talking about the entrepreneurship side. So I've been, doing research, as I mentioned, for decades now, and as my research group, as we develop new technologies, on one hand, it's great to write papers, and also, a number of our papers got like best paper awards or test of time awards and so on. So it's one thing to push forward on the research frontier, and at the same time, in addition, it's often very rewarding to actually see the technology having real impacts in the real world. So that's the next step, is about taking research technology actually into the real world by doing startups, commercializing it, developing products, and so on, to really have the technology taking the next step. And so in the past, I actually have done this a few times. The first time was a startup called Security, where we focus on mobile security, in particular developing automated technologies and tools to analyze mobile apps, for example, Android apps and so on, to analyze for its security vulnerabilities as well as malicious behaviors. And this information can be very helpful in protecting, for example, mobile phone users and enterprise against mobile security threats. And so that company was successful. It was acquired by FireEye, and the product actually was used by Fortune 500 companies and governments around the world.
And was that a spinout? Was that something that was developed within, say, Berkeley with students and then was spun out as a commercial entity, or was this in parallel?
Yeah, so the technology started out in my research lab at Berkeley. We developed these automated security analysis tools for mobile apps. And as the technology becomes powerful and sufficiently powerful to really analyze these real world apps, that's when me and some of my students, we realized it's a good time to take this to the real world, to have the technologies and tools to benefit the real world as well. So that's how that happened.
And what are the time cycles involved in something like that? So obviously, often these things are referred to as deep tech, and that definition usually means that it could be decades of research before the commercialization of a technology. But how does that work for you in an adventure like that?
Right, the technology was developed actually, over a long period of time. And in fact, these automated analysis tools, I started the research in the space. Initially, actually, was in program binaries. That was, I think, even when I was at Carnegie Mellon, and then so these program analysis tools, oftentimes they actually share similar similar principles and theory, but you can apply it actually in different domains. We certainly in program binaries develop some of the first analysis, dynamic and static analysis tools in program binaries with advanced capabilities like symbolic execution and so on. And then also did work in actually analyzing web applications. And then for mobile application, I think the timing was also very good. And certain features in mobile application makes the technology more effective in addressing certain types of issues. So I would say the accumulation of technical expertise and developing the right approach and solutions, it takes many years of research and development.
And so you were talking about, that was one instance, but there were kind of several more where you'd kind of span out and commercialized.
Actually, the company is now called Mental Security. So it also started out as a research technology developed in my research group. Essentially, it's about secure browsing. So as you, for example, as you browse through the web, of course, there can be malicious JavaScript that comes through, and some of these malicious codes, they can compromise your browser, compromise your machine, and then leave the user in the insecure state. So the idea is, can we actually build a really easy way that doesn't really impact user experience? User can still browse the web like how he or she normally does, but actually provides a strong protection to prevent, for example, this malicious, like the JavaScript, other malicious code to come through. So one way to view it is like building a glass box where you contain the malicious code inside this glass box. So the user can still see and interact with the web page as normal, but it's more like through this glass box, you can see what's inside, but what's inside cannot come out. So that's just one analogy. So essentially, that's what we call secure browsing. So the way to think about it, actually the glass box is kind of in the cloud. So it's a cloud browser that renders the web page in a sandbox environment, and it passes through it essentially allows the user to view and interact with the web page through this secured glass box. And so this way, the user's machine is protected, but at the same time, the user's browsing experience stays the same. So that company is also doing well. It also, I think, has Fortune 500 companies as its customers around the globe as well. So these are all great examples how technology is developed in a research group can really help benefit the real world.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And it's a good segue into Oasis Labs, where you're founder and CEO. But in a way, it could be said that you, as an innovator, you're almost building a portfolio of IP that you can then commercially exploit with various teams. How is your role in these organizations? Is it the same as now with Oasis, where effectively you play a role in the early stage of a company in terms of kind of helping bring it to market, provide that leadership, but then you kind of step back and there's a bigger team that kind of scale that? How, as a founder, how would I understand, because obviously there are different types of founders, how would I understand, typically your role as a founder in that context of these kind of R&D spinouts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very good question. Oftentimes these technologies, even though we have been, working on developing it in the research lab for oftentimes a long time, But when we first take it into the commercial world, it's still early, and oftentimes you still need to figure out what is a product. Right, because in academia, in the research setting, we focus on developing the technology, developing the best cutting edge technology, and solving really hard, challenging technical problems. But when you take that technology into the real world, you then actually have to figure out what is the right product to build that technology can enable and make it easy to use, make it easy to deploy, and solve customers' pain points. And because of that, then oftentimes the person who does that needs to know the technology well, and also seeing the real world problems, and then can see what problem the technology can help solve and what's the best. You can call it beachheads and so on, how to best turn that technology into a product. And because of that, I think oftentimes, at least right in these examples, like I oftentimes right in Oasis case and also in Insider's case, like I was the CEO, and a big part of it is to try to identify how to best apply the technology in the real world. Right. So I think especially at the early stage, that's really important because you need someone who knows the technology really well to do that.
Often when I speak to founders who are from an R&D background, especially an academic one, they are very good at solving technical problems, but they're quite difficult for a non-technical person like myself to keep up with. But I must say, just even hearing you talk now about analogies like containing things in a glass box and other interviews that I've seen, you're very good at framing and simplifying complexity. And so I think that's clearly why you've been able to be so successful in the commercialization of projects. So now you're at Oasis Labs, founded in March 2018, where you're founder and CEO. You've been backed by a number of major investors, including Andreessen, Excel, as well as Binance and several others. I believe you have two parts to that, Oasis Labs and Oasis Foundation, and mainnet is imminent at time of talking, so we're September 2020, and this will allow the network to become token optimized. Before we get into Oasis Labs, I think it's important to step back a bit and frame the mission. So as I alluded to earlier, you refer to it as a responsible data economy, something we would at Outlier would refer to as an open data economy. But it would be great to hear from you. Firstly, why do we need a responsible data economy? I'm assuming if we it is in response to the current data economy and what's wrong with it. Obviously, a word that's starting to resonate beyond the niche of the technical community is surveillance capitalism. This idea that the current business model of the data economy is not working or doesn't work for the average user. But it'd be great to hear from you. Why do we need a responsible data economy? Why is that mission important to you? Presumably the most important thing to you, because you could be working on several other things right now were it not Oasis Labs.
So that's a very good question, and it's also an area that I've been working for a very long time. So today, as we all know, that data is a key driver of modern economy. It helps us extract better insights, helps us to make better decisions and so on. And especially, with the rise of data science, machine learning and so on, it's becoming even more important. And in the future, it's going to be prevalent in terms of how important data is. However, at the same time, a lot of this data is sensitive, and handling the sensitive data has been posing many challenges as we have experienced today. So first, let's look at on the user side. On the user side, a lot of users realizing that they are actually losing control of their data. Once their data is collected, oftentimes they don't even know when their data is being collected and what data of theirs is being collected. And they don't know when, after their data is collected, how it's being used, and so on. And also, users are losing trust of the services that they use because of this as well. And also at the same time, users are not getting sufficient benefits from their own valuable data. Of course, users are getting certain free services and so on. But in the future, as we know, again, data is going to be even more important. And also, ultimately, in the future, I think a big part of who you are is actually going to be defined by your data, by your digital self. And hence, there is, of course, the question, is it sufficient just for users to get these free services, or actually users can get even more direct benefits from their data? So that's one side for on the user side, and on the business side, we're also seeing a lot of challenges. First, businesses continue to suffer really large-scale data breaches and so on. So even when they want to do a good job, oftentimes they just don't have sufficient technologies and tools to help them with that. And also with the rise of the new privacy regulations, such as GDPR, CCPA, and so on, it's becoming more and more cumbersome and expensive for the businesses to comply with these regulations. And there has been estimates, even just for CCPA alone, it's going to cost like billions of dollars for businesses to comply. And even more importantly, what we are seeing, what we continue to hear is that it's actually really difficult for businesses to get access to data, to actually utilize data. A lot of valuable data is locked up in data silos due to privacy concerns and so on. And even with COVID, it's a very good example. Data, of course, is really important for us to better fight against COVID-19, both in terms of doing better contact tracing so that we can better identify who are infected and who are at risk, and what's the right measure to take, and also to identify how to better, who may be sick, and hence how to better utilize hospital resources and so on. But in general, still it's actually difficult for people to get, for example, for medical researchers to get access to data to help them develop better tools and cures for COVID and so on. And sometimes it actually goes the other way too far. Then there's no privacy protection, and some of even earlier guidance that was put in place was also, there is also discussion about removing them to try to optimize for speed and so on. So then, again, I think the COVID-19 is a great example showing that we really need to have better and more effective and systematic solutions to address these challenges. Essentially, how you can provide better privacy protection and at the same time to be able to utilize data. So to address these challenges that I just mentioned, essentially we need a new framework, because what we have today, as we have seen, is really insufficient. So this leads to this new paradigm and framework that I call responsible data economy, essentially to build up this new framework that can, ultimately can help us to both establish and ensure users' rights to data, and to help them maintain their rights to data, including how they want their data to be used and so on. And also at the same time, to really enable data to be more effectively utilized while complying and honoring and enforcing these users' rights to data. So that's really the essence of this responsible data economy, is to bring what we see the conflict actually into ideally a win-win situation for users and businesses.
Obviously, when we're thinking about data and privacy, there are different cultural attitudes towards it. So I would argue it's not the same in Europe, in Germany, for example, as it is on the west coast of the US, similarly in China and parts of Asia. So when we're talking about privacy and we're talking about data, how do you see what you're doing with Oasis, or that kind of mission of responsible data? Do you believe that there is a universal form of privacy that is common across all of these different cultures? Are there actually multiple data economies? So rather than being a data economy, there are multiple data economies. And how does that interact with the different polities that effectively, from a jurisdictional perspective?
Okay, that's a great question. I think, of course, different people naturally have different preferences. And hence, I think the point of the responsible data economy is that's why I would say, is to give users control. And users can decide what they are comfortable with and what their preference is. So, for example, let me actually give you one use case that we have been working on, and this is products that we will be launching soon with a partner. So this is a use case in genomic data. So as we know, genomic data, of course, is one of the most sensitive data for users, and in particular, you cannot change it. You can't change your genes. So it's privacy is particularly important. And so you may have heard of 23andMe and other companies like that. These are direct-to-consumer genomic companies that they provide genomic analysis to their users. And these companies, actually 23andMe and Ancestry, earlier this year, they actually had layoffs, citing in particular for the slower demand in consumer, mainly due to largely due to privacy concerns. And I've had a number of my friends actually told me that they would be concerned about using these type of genomic services for privacy concerns and so on. So the product service that we are in the process of launching with a partner in the space is to actually help users to become owners of their genomic data and take control of their genomic data. So in this case, users' data will be stored in encrypted form, and users have the control. They can decide how they want the data to be used and who they would allow the data to be used. So, for example, in this case, the user can give consent to a genomic company and to have the genomic company run genomic analysis on their data to provide results. So, for example, what disease you may have higher likelihoods to have, and so on. And then in this case, actually utilizing our technology actually by combining secure computing and blockchain. So the blockchain helps using keep a immutable ledger of users' rights to data. In this case, their rights to their genomic data, and also their the policy for their data. For example, in this case, they consent for their data to be used by this particular genomic analysis company. And then when the genomic company runs the analysis, the genomic company actually doesn't get a raw copy of the user's data. The analysis is run in a secure execution environment. And then in this case, so the user will see the results, but the genomic company, because the computation actually runs in this secure execution environment, the genomic company again doesn't get a copy of this of the raw data, and hence after the computation is done, the genomic company doesn't really have access to the data. Again, if it wants to use the data, it needs to ask for permission again to use the data and so on. So then, and in this case, this is how users can maintain control of their data and also at the same time still benefit from the data. And of course, there are many more other use cases like this. And then again, so one thing here you may notice that it's up to the user to decide. So for example, for some users, actually, they put their genomic data open in the public. But lots of other users have more concerns about properly protecting their genomic data and so on. So I think what we are doing here is provides the technologies and the tools to help users to achieve what they want, while providing the capabilities to support a wide spectrum.
The interesting point about that use case, genomic data, is that it builds up a very strong argument for user centricity, or as you say, user control. Because on the one hand, I've heard the example of if you hand over the rights to your genomic data to a particular organization, then effectively it's turned your DNA into IP, and that IP could be sold to pharma. You effectively lose control. You could be cloned in the future, who knows? But at the same time, for the organization that has to own that data, they have to be able to secure it. And to secure it, to fail to secure it is a huge liability now, especially with data laws like GDPR. The cost of not securing it could be billions. It could bankrupt a company. I think in some cases it's almost unlimited. So there is a very good commercial argument as to why you don't necessarily want to directly own the data. You just want to have access to that data to derive value from it for putting into machine learning, for example.
Right, exactly. Yes. Yeah, this is also some of the value propositions that we provide to our customers, is that, because oftentimes they actually don't have the skill sets and the technology needed to do that well.
Right. So we're kind of naturally going into one of my other questions, which is, if you look at your research background, there are kind of these parallel streams. You have, an interest in cryptography, applied cryptography, blockchain, and then, of course, machine learning. And these two streams have converged into what you're now doing at Oasis Labs and with the Oasis network. Was there an aha moment in that process, or did it just naturally happen? And could you explain, I guess, the benefits of blockchain to machine learning?
That's a good question. So I would say, really, so blockchain here, as I mentioned, for example, in the Oasis network platform, we are combining the blockchain and the secure computing, where the blockchain provides a immutable ledger for users' rights to data and their policies on how their data should be utilized and so on. And in machine learning, of course, as we know, in particular, with today's methods like deep learning and so on, it's hugely data hungry, and you need huge amounts of data to train these models and so on. And of course, oftentimes a lot of the data can be very sensitive. So essentially, with the Oasis platform, again, as I mentioned, with this responsible data economy, it helps helps users to maintain control of their data and the rest of data, and also at the same time, the data can be utilized in a privacy-preserving way, for example, to help train machine learning models. And also, because with the blockchain here, we actually track every access to users' data, how the data is being used, by who, by what program, and so on. So then, in this case, it also naturally establishes an audit trail even for value distribution. So, for example, if a machine learning model is trained using users' data, and the machine learning model later on becomes a profitable service, then some of that profits could be distributed back to the data contributors. And in my research at Berkeley with my students and postdocs and so on, and the collaborators, we also actually have studied the question about how to value data. So for example, if you train a machine learning model using a set of data points from different data sources, different data contributors, what's the best way, what's the fair way to distribute the value created by the machine learning model back to the data contributors? And in there, we actually identified this notion called the Shapley value, which actually provides a uniquely well-suited solution that essentially satisfies a set of desired properties. So this is another example how how this responsible data economy and this new framework can actually help users not just maintain control of their data and rest of data, and also getting benefits directly from their data. And we are also further exploring using these technologies, we can create what we call data trust, where different users can put their data into this data trust, and again, for these data consumers, they can then utilize the data to train machine models, do other analysis, and so on. And then, this helps with, for example, social goods for medical research and so on, or if it generates revenue or profits, it can be distributed back into the trust and distributed back to the data contributors and so on. And the hope is that in the future, again, this actually can be a very good way to help solve this data silo problems as well. So to make it easier for machine learning researchers to gain access to data, and also at the same time to provide privacy protection for users' data.
I think new models in data ownership, data trust, data commons, where you can aggregate data against predefined purposes, I think is a really interesting space. I'm going to be interested to see how that converges with DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, around the ownership of data. And an interesting area which Trent McConaughey of Ocean talks about a lot, he's done a recent post again in September, is the idea of leveraging the billions of dollars that have gone into creating wallets, assets, and exchanges for crypto. There's this kind of high value asset, how that can be now repurposed for the data economy, which you could argue is a lower value asset, but we can now leverage the same infrastructure if we can turn data into a digital asset. So one of the things, so I personally totally subscribe to all the things that you've been talking about. It kind of feels like there's still some missing building blocks for us to achieve this in Web3, in particular on identity. And I know that this has been an area you've been speaking about a lot recently. If we're going to give control and permission to data in a increasingly decentralized way, we somehow need to solve for decentralized identity, self-sovereign identity, through innovations such as DID's decentralized identifiers. How do you see the importance of solving identity? And, do you think that limits what's possible today? Or do you think that there's kind of a hybrid approach, a more centralized approach, which can allow us to still unlock this value from the data economy?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think decentralized identity is just one step in this responsible data economy, where you want users to own their data or to maintain control to their data and their rights to data, and their decentralized identity help them. And it's one step in this process. Essentially, if you think about it, as users maintain, control of their data, the way they maintain control of their data is that essentially you can utilize decentralized identity to help maintain, to identify which data the user has control over, and so on. So the mechanics actually, it's a natural component in that, but the responsible data economy is much broader than just identity, as different aspects of users' data and how that data can be utilized in a privacy-preserving way.
Right, and then I guess to zoom out a bit, if we look at what we collectively are trying to achieve in the responsible data economy, we're kind of putting in place these various building blocks, protocols to create a stack to allow this fairer, more responsible, or at least user-controlled data economy. But ultimately, in my mind, that is really to serve a fairer or more responsible AI economy, because ultimately the purpose for data these days is to feed into or improve forms of AI, or at least machine learning. So if we look at that paradigm that we're building alongside other instances, things like GPT-3 that's being rolled out by OpenAI, which is a collaboration between a number of organizations, including Musk and Peter Thiel, that is permissioned, at least for now. Whilst it's open source, it is heavily permissioned, and is not leveraging blockchain, is not token optimized in any way. Do you see this as a parallel competing paradigm, or are they different things? Are they working towards different ends?
So I think one thing I think that's really important that we are still just at the very beginning is that right now the AI power is more concentrated in the bigger companies and so on. And ultimately, as the AI power becomes even more and more advanced and so on, like so many different aspects of users' lives would be impacted, influenced, or even determined by these AI agents. And ideally, I think as a next step, talking about self-sovereignty, there's self-sovereignty of finance, your data, but ultimately you want to have self-sovereignty of AI, meaning you would like to have AI assistants, agents that actually work on your behalf, that is working for your best interest, instead of just providing your data to some other third-party AI agents that may have others' best interests at heart. So we are still like really early for that. I think like 2 years ago, I actually gave a talk on this about how eventually we would like to build this paradigm that we call AI Eden that actually helps users to not just maintain control of their data and rights to data, but ultimately actually have these AI agents that is under users' control and works for the best interests of users. So I think ultimately that's where we want to be, and it's great to see. So first of all, these first we need to actually build these powerful AI agents and so on. And yeah, so today like GPT-3 is still like the model is really big, so it's difficult also for individuals to like to maintain their own and so on. But I hope that in the future, as the AI the AI technology continues to improve, and I do hope that one day I think this would become true.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So whilst in parallel, people are building out these new models, which will hopefully become increasingly more open, or at least less concentrated in the hands of a few platforms. If in parallel we're also fixing the web, we're building a web that has increased levels of user-centricity, by the time that OpenAI matures, it can be birthed into a web which serves the individual versus, say, the shareholder or the state. Dawn, it's been really fascinating talking to you. I know we tried really hard to make this happen for a number of reasons, notwithstanding Zoom problems, because at the moment I'm speaking to you, you're in China, and that's always technical difficulties. So thanks for making this happen and bearing with those technical difficulties. And good luck with mainnet for Oasis Network. I believe that this is imminent, right? You're aiming for October this year, 2020.
Yes, September, October timeframe. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. I like the way you gave yourself some flex there. A good 4-week flex. Dawn, it's been fascinating talking to you. Thanks for your time. Looking forward to speaking to you again.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun talking together.
If you're an early stage Web3 founder, apply to our award-winning accelerator program, Basecamp, at outlierventures.io/Basecamp. We write your first $50,000 check and give you access to 200 mentors, including many of the leading Web3 founders, and a network of 1,000 of the world's leading investors and exchanges. We've helped over 30 startups from 15 countries from all around the world raise $130 million in growth funding, and can help you fast-track product market fit and, where relevant, the launch of your token economy.